"You're not my husband anymore." Camille didn't just say it. She announced it through the microphone, in front of more than 300 people. Investors applauded. Cameras flashed. The man standing beside her slipped his arm around her waist as security started walking toward me. Everyone expected me to fight, to beg, to remind them I'd helped build the company they were celebrating. Instead, I took off my badge, placed it on the table, looked at Camille one last time, and said only 7 words. "I hope you know what you just did." She laughed. Less than an hour later, the celebration was over, and the first person to realize why was the woman who had just told the whole world I wasn't her husband anymore. If the person you loved denied you in front of hundreds of people, would you fight to explain, or would you just walk away in silence? Tell me in the comments. My name is Nolan. I built the platform this company runs on. I built it in a garage, alone, late nights, cold coffee, no investors, no team, just me and a laptop. Back then, nobody believed in the idea. Banks said no. Friends said I was wasting my life. Camille never said that. She sat next to me on the floor of that garage. She brought me food when I forgot to eat. She believed in the code before it even worked. That's why I married her. She had a dream too. She wanted to run something big, something the world would notice. She wanted her name on a door. I didn't want the spotlight. I never did. So when the company started growing, I made a choice. I gave her the stage. I made her CEO. I stayed behind the scenes, fixing bugs at 2 a.m., writing code nobody else could read, keeping the whole system alive while she gave interviews upstairs. She loved it out there. Magazine covers, TED Talks, TV interviews, her face on billboards. People started calling her the woman who built the future. I never corrected them, not once. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself love doesn't need a title. I told myself I was happy watching her shine. One night, I was fixing a server crash alone in the office. It was almost midnight. An old engineer on my team, a man named Russo, walked past and saw my screen full of code. He didn't say much. He just stood there for a second. Then he said, "Nobody here understands that system, except you." I just nodded. "You know that, right?" he said. "If you left, this whole place stops." I laughed it off. "I'm not going anywhere." He looked at me for a long moment, like he wanted to say something more. Then he just shook his head and walked away. I went back to my screen. I didn't think about his words again. Not for months. I trusted Camille completely. I thought we were building something together. Company, a life, a future. I didn't need credit. I thought love didn't need credit either. I was wrong. The company was getting ready for its IPO. Investors wanted speed. More growth. More numbers. Faster. That's when Camille brought in Ethan Ross. He was a big name. A COO from a famous tech company. Sharp suit. Sharp smile. The kind of guy who shakes your hand and checks his watch at the same time. I shook his hand at the first meeting. He held it a little too long. "So you're the mystery guy," he said. "The one who never talks in interviews." "I like it that way," I said. He smiled. "Interesting." He turned to Camille before I even finished my sentence. Over the next few weeks, something changed. I got left off meeting invites. Small ones at first, then important ones. The ones about the platform I built with my own hands. My system access got cut. Just a little. Just enough. Ethan started sitting in my old chair during strategy meetings. Nobody asked me if that was okay. I asked Camille about it one night. We were in the kitchen. She was checking her phone. "Ethan thinks we need fresh leadership on the technical side," she said. She didn't look up. "You're brilliant, Nolan, but investors want someone more polished, more modern." "I built the whole platform," I said. "I know." She still didn't look at me. "Nobody's forgetting that." "Then why does it feel like I'm disappearing?" She didn't answer that one. I wanted to argue. I wanted to remind her who fixed every crash, every bug, every disaster at 3 a.m. while she slept. I didn't. I just nodded and walked out of the kitchen. That night, the servers crashed again. A big one. Nobody called Ethan. They called me. I fixed it, like I always did. I sat alone in the dark office, coffee gone cold, lines of code moving across my screen until the sun came up. Nobody in that meeting room the next morning knew I was up until 4 a.m. saving the exact platform they were about to sell to the world. I didn't tell anyone. I just kept doing it, quietly, every single night, like a ghost keeping the whole building standing while everyone else took the credit in daylight. I told myself this was temporary. I told myself Camille just needed time. I told myself she'd remember who I was sooner or later. I was still telling myself that when everything fell apart. I found out the truth by accident. It was a Tuesday. I came back to the office late to pick up a jacket I'd forgotten. The lights were off in most of the building. Most of the desks were empty. I could hear my own footsteps on the tile floor. Then I saw one office still lit. Camille's office. I heard her laugh before I saw her. That laugh I hadn't heard in months. Not with me anyway. It used to be my favorite sound in the world. Through the glass, I saw Ethan standing close to her. Too close. His hand on her shoulder. Her head tilted toward him like she used to tilt it toward me. Back when we sat on the floor of that garage together. I didn't go in. I stood in the dark hallway and watched my marriage end through a window. Nobody saw me. Nobody knew I was even there. I didn't say a word. I just walked back to the elevator and went home. I remember the elevator ride felt longer than usual. I remember staring at my own reflection in the metal doors and not recognizing the man looking back. For 2 weeks, I said nothing. I watched her come home late, blaming meetings that ran long. I watched her check her phone under the table at dinner, smiling at messages she never showed me. I watched her flinch every time I touched her hand, like my skin had become something unfamiliar. I already knew. I just wasn't ready to hear it out loud. Some part of me kept hoping I was wrong. That old part of me that still believed in the woman from the garage. Then, one night, I found papers on her desk while looking for a stapler. Divorce papers. Already drafted. Already signed on her side. My hands were shaking, but my face stayed calm. I've always been good at that. Staying calm while everything inside me falls apart quietly. Next to the papers, a printed email between her and Ethan. The subject line said, "After IPO, Nolan's exit plan." They weren't just ending my marriage. They were planning to end my career too. Quietly, after the IPO closed. After the world stopped needing the man behind the curtain. After I'd already fixed every server, every crash, every disaster one last time. I sat there for a long time. Not angry, not yet, just quiet. The kind of quiet that comes right before something breaks. 2 days later, the company announced the Series C round. $150 million. The biggest moment in company history. Reporters lined up outside. Champagne waited in the back room. I put on a suit. I sat in the front row like I always did. Like a good, quiet husband. Nobody in that room knew what I already knew. Camille stepped up to the mic cameras flashed. Investors clapped before she even said a word. She looked at me. Her face was calm. Too calm. Rehearsed, almost. "From today," she said into the microphone, "he's not my husband anymore." The room went silent. I could hear my own heartbeat. She pointed at the door. "Security. Escort him out." I heard laughing. Somewhere in the back of the room, people were laughing at me. Strangers who had no idea what they were laughing at. I stood up slowly. I unclipped my badge. I set it on the table in front of me right next to the microphone stand. I looked at Camille one last time. "I hope you know what you just did," I said. She laughed. A short, sharp laugh like I told a bad joke at a party. I turned and walked out, past the guards, past the cameras, past 300 people who thought they just watched a woman finally free herself from a boring, useless husband. None of them knew what I knew. Before I left the building that night, I sat in my car in the parking garage for almost an hour. I opened my laptop. My hands were steady now. I wrote one email. Just one. Short. Formal. I didn't send it to Camille. I sent it to the board of directors, legal, and compliance. I read it twice. Then I hit send. I closed the laptop and drove home in silence. No music, just the hum of the engine and the quiet ache in my chest. Nobody in that ballroom knew what was in that email. Not even Camille. If someone betrayed you like this, would you send an angry message? Or would you send something they'd never see coming? Tell me what you do in the comments. 24 hours later, my phone started ringing. I didn't answer. I sat in my kitchen, drinking coffee, and watched the news alert pop up on my screen. Major server outage hits tech company hours after $150 million funding announcement. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel sad either. I just felt still, like watching weather from behind a window. By noon, the story had grown. The AI platform was giving customers wrong results. Not small errors, big ones, the kind that cost real money. One of the company's largest clients, a logistics firm that used the platform to run their entire shipping schedule, canceled their contract within hours. Just like that, years of partnership gone in one phone call. The stock, already priced for the IPO, started falling before the market even opened the next day. I imagined Camille in her office watching those numbers drop in real time. I imagined her hands shaking around her coffee cup the way mine used to. I heard later that Ethan tried to calm everyone down. "It's just a small glitch," he told the board, according to someone who was in the room. "We'll have it fixed by tonight." It wasn't fixed by tonight. It wasn't fixed the next night either. Every hour, the errors got bigger. The system wasn't just breaking. It was unraveling piece by piece, like a sweater with one pulled thread. Nobody on that team understood what they were looking at. They saw code. I saw 12 years of my life. 3 days after the announcement, the truth about my email finally reached the board. It wasn't a resignation letter. I never called it that. It was a formal notice. I was ending my role as chief system architect. Effective immediately. Documented. Legal. Clean. Buried inside the company's own security policy written years ago, back when I still trusted everyone in that building, was one line I had insisted on adding myself. Every critical security update required sign-off from an approved system architect. Approved by the board. In writing, there was only ever one name on that approval list. Mine. Nobody else had ever been trained. Nobody else had ever been given full access. Not because I was hiding something, because nobody else had ever asked to learn. Now, with my name gone, no update could be approved. No patch could be pushed. No emergency fix could go live. The system wasn't broken because of some accident. It was frozen, legally, permanently, until someone with real authority learned it well enough to take my place. And there was no one. I sat at home that night, watching my old company trend on every news channel, and I felt something strange settle into my chest. Not revenge, just quiet. The kind of quiet you feel after you finally stop holding something up that was never yours to carry alone. By the end of that week, the investors started calling. Not to celebrate, to pull out. One by one, the biggest names on the Series C list sent short emails. Polite, formal, final. "We're pausing our commitment until the technical issues are resolved." The IPO, the one everyone had planned for 2 years, got delayed. Then delayed again. Then nobody said a date out loud anymore. I heard the news from Russo, the old engineer. He still had my number. "You should see this place," he said on the phone. "It's chaos." "I'm not surprised," I said. "Camille's been asking about you," he said quietly. "She doesn't say your name. She just asks if anyone's heard from the old architect." I didn't answer that. Meanwhile, 2 of the company's biggest clients filed lawsuits. Breach of contract. Lost revenue. Their lawyers moved fast. Faster than anyone at the company could respond. Camille finally sat down and looked at the actual architecture documents. The real ones. The ones I'd written for myself in my own shorthand over 12 years. There weren't many. Most of it lived in my head. Patterns I never wrote down because I never needed to. Shortcuts only I understood. A structure built the way a mind builds a language, not the way a company builds a manual. Nobody could read it. Not Ethan. Not the new engineers they rushed in. Not the consultants they paid a fortune to fly in from 3 different countries. Ethan tried anyway. He pulled in a team of outside contractors. They worked around the clock for 4 days straight, trying to patch what they didn't understand. They made it worse. Whole sections of the platform went dark. Customer data got mismatched. One update accidentally deleted 3 weeks of transaction logs for a mid-sized client. That client's lawyers called before the sun came up the next morning. Then came the discovery that broke something in the boardroom. A junior lawyer doing due diligence for a potential rescue investor pulled the original patent filings. She found something strange. The core patents, the ones behind the entire AI platform, the technology this whole company was built on. They were never fully transferred to the company. I had only ever granted a license, a contract that let the company use my technology under specific terms for as long as I stayed involved. It was all legal, all documented. I'd signed it myself years ago, back when a lawyer friend told me, almost as a joke, never give away everything you build, not even to people you trust. I hadn't listened to him completely, but I'd listened enough. When the board found out, the room reportedly went silent for almost a full minute. Camille sat at the head of the table, staring at a printed copy of a contract with her own signature on it. A contract she'd signed years ago without really reading, because back then, she trusted me completely. She just never imagined she'd need to read it this closely. I heard she left the building that night without saying a word to anyone. Nobody saw her car in the parking garage the next morning. For the first time since that stage, since that microphone, since those 7 words I'd said back to her, I heard she finally understood what she'd actually thrown away. Not just a husband, the only person who ever truly knew how to keep her empire standing. She showed up at my apartment on a Sunday morning. I hadn't seen her in almost a month. She looked thinner, tired. Her hands shook a little when she stood in my doorway. "Can we talk?" she said. I let her in. I didn't say much. I made 2 cups of coffee out of habit, even though I wasn't sure she'd stay long enough to drink hers. She sat down at my kitchen table, the same kind of table we used to have in our first apartment years ago before any of this. "I want you back," she said. I didn't answer right away. "Not just at the company," she said. "I mean, I'll give you anything. Money, shares, the CEO title if that's what you want. Just come back, Nolan. Please." I looked at her for a long moment. "Is that really what you came here to ask?" I said. She nodded, eyes already filling with tears. I leaned forward. "If you hadn't said those words that night," I said quietly, "in front of all those people, would you even be sitting here right now?" She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. She looked down at her coffee. Her hands were still shaking. She didn't answer. She couldn't. Tears started falling before she could stop them. Real ones this time. Not the calm, rehearsed face from that stage. Just a woman who finally understood what she'd lost. Sitting at a small table in an apartment that used to be half hers. I didn't reach for her hand. I didn't need to say anything else either. 3 days later, I heard the board finally acted. Ethan was fired first. Quietly, without a press release, without cameras this time. No microphone, no applause. Then came the vote for Camille. I wasn't in that room. I didn't need to be. Russo called me right after. "They voted her out," he said. "CEO position gone. Effective today." I didn't feel joy hearing that. I didn't feel much of anything, actually. Just a strange, heavy stillness. Like closing a book I'd read too many times. I never asked for the company back. I never even asked for my old title. What I did do quietly through my lawyer was activate one clause. A small one, buried deep in that original licensing agreement. The one about what happens if I leave and the license isn't renewed within a set number of days. The days had already passed. Every technology license the company depended on quietly expired. All at once. Completely legal. Fully documented. Nothing anyone could challenge in court, no matter how hard they tried. I didn't take anything that wasn't already mine. I just stopped giving away what never should have left my hands in the first place. A year passed. I started a new company. Small at first. Just me and a few people I trusted. I only hired 2 kinds of engineers. Young ones, fresh out of school, hungry to learn, and people who'd been overlooked everywhere else. People other companies said weren't polished enough. People like I used to be. We grew slowly, quietly, the way I like things. I heard Camille was working at a small startup across town. Nothing close to what she used to run. No stage, no cameras, no magazine covers. One afternoon, I was walking to a meeting when I saw her. She was standing outside my new building, looking up at the entrance. She hadn't seen me yet. Above the door, in simple letters, was a line I'd written myself the day we opened. People don't build great companies. Trust does. She stood there for a long time, just looking at it. Her arms crossed, like she was cold even though it wasn't a cold day. She didn't come in. I watched her through the glass for a moment. She looked older, not in a bad way, just quieter, like someone who'd learned something the hard way. I didn't go out to talk to her. There was nothing left to say that those words on the wall hadn't already said for me. I just smiled. A small, honest smile. Not angry, not proud either. Then I turned around and walked back to my meeting. This time, I wasn't standing behind anyone. I was standing at the front of the room in my own company, built on my own name, surrounded by people who actually saw me. For the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. If this story reminded you that a relationship doesn't fall apart because of a lack of love, but because of a lack of respect, hit subscribe for more stories like this one. And I want to ask you something. What do you think Camille really lost the day she said, "You're not my husband anymore"? Tell me in the comments.